Hi, this is Alex, and if you love music, well, you've come to the right place because we're all about albums. Well, another year has gone by, and 2021 was another tough year for socialization. Even though 2021 started out great with vaccinations, which are fantastic, still in all, the virus has seemed to be able to mutate, and we're still within the depths of COVID. Over 800,000 deaths here in the United States due to COVID, and sadly, my mom makes up one of those statistics. There have been many instances in my life where music and my mother are tightly intertwined. I want to share with you those moments where music is forever linked with my mother. This first started in 1964. Back then, my father traveled quite a bit, and my mom was left at home taking care of me and my sister. And back in February 9th, it was a Sunday in 1964, you guessed it, it was the Beatles, and they were going to be on the Ed Sullivan Show. Now, I was quite young, and I had a strict early bedtime, but with my father away, my mom allowed me to go into her bedroom and watch with her the Ed Sullivan Show and seeing the Beatles for the first time. The only thing I remember about that evening is a lot of screaming that was happening on the television. I don't think I remember any of the music, but what I do remember is spending that time with my mom seeing the Beatles for the first time. When I was 12 or 13 years old, many years before I could drive, my mom was kind enough, after I was badgering quite a bit, to take me to the local record store because I wanted to buy for the first time my own albums. That was my first time in a record store, but I'll never forget being in there for the first time and buying my first two albums. And they were, as I mentioned on a prior video, the Raspberries. This was my first album I ever bought, and my second album I ever bought was the Beatles' Red Album. This was the early greatest hits of the Beatles. Now, this album, as well as the Raspberries album, since I only had two albums, I played them quite a bit early on. And this album, I probably played more than any other album that I own in the first 3 years of collecting music. Those two record albums, every time I play them, I do think of my mother. When I was a bit older, my parents were going to take a vacation to London, and before they left, my mom asked my sister and I what we wanted her to bring back for us. And I was just getting into the Rolling Stones back then, so I asked her, bring me home a Rolling Stones album. Now, my mom didn't know anything about the Rolling Stones, but that wasn't going to stop her. In London, she sought out a local record store, which was the HMV shop, which stands for His Master's Voice. And in the store, she talked to a clerk and said that she wanted to buy a Rolling Stones album for her son. And the clerk told her, boy, you're a cool mom. I wish your mom was as cool as you. Anyway, the album she brought me back was the early hits of the Rolling Stones, High Tide and Green Grass. And as you can see here, I never took the sticker off, but this is the sticker from the HMV shop where she bought this album. And the two things I remember most about this album is, number one, when I opened the album, lo and behold, I was like looking, what the heck is this? And this was my first album that actually had a lined dust cover, and I thought that was really cool. The second thing I remember most about this album is I love the song Satisfaction, and to this day it's still my favorite song. And I think when I opened up the album and put it on the turntable, I literally played it 30 times straight. And my dad came into my room and says, enough with that song, play something else. So I have to thank my mom again, and I will forever link the Rolling Stones, especially that album, to my mother. My cousin is 4 years older than me, and when I would go over to his house to visit, I would always be excited because he would always play for me some new music that I was not ever exposed to, and so I would learn quite a bit of music from him. One day, he played for me an album that I was enthralled with. And he showed me the album, and it was an artist I hadn't heard of yet, Bob Seger. This was before he had released his big live Bullet album. And the album he played for me was Bob Seger's Back in '72. So obviously the next day I ran to the record store and tried to find the album. And I was told that this is a pretty rare album and he's going to have trouble finding it. And sure enough, I tried and tried to find this album and I couldn't. Now, when my mom would travel, she would always look for this album for me. She would always ask the clerk, "Do you have Bob Seger's Back in '72? And they would look at her strange. But she would always try for me, and I always loved that about her. She always was very kind and always wanted to please me, and I really appreciated that. So you may ask, well, did your mother or you ever become successful and find Bob Seger's Back in '72? Well, the answer is no, we never did. And this again is before the internet and eBay, so it wasn't so easy to find this album. This album, from what I understood, only had a few thousand copies pressed. It was on the Palladium record. Well, a little time went by and my cousin who turned me on to Bob Seger surprised me and found the album for me. I couldn't believe it. I was so excited, and I ran over to his home to get the album, but as luck would have it, this is what I got. The dust sleeve and the original album in great shape. It was a new album. I was very excited, but I had no album jacket. But my cousin wasn't dissuaded. He asked the proprietor if he had any blank album jackets, which he did. And my cousin went home and with a black marker wrote all the liner notes, as you can see, in both the front and the back of the album. And I gotta say, this is my most cherished album. This album covers the one that I love the most. I have subsequently, through eBay, found the original album jacket, but this is the one that I love the most. And forever I will remember Bob Seger's Back in '72 as an album that I am entwined with both my cousin and my mom. Even after I got the album, because I didn't have the album jacket, she would always go into record stores for me and always asked if they had the album jacket for Bob Seger's Back in '72. Anytime I hear an old show tune, any show tune before the '70s, I instantly remember my mom. My parents both loved Broadway, and they owned not that many albums, but what they did own was mostly Broadway show tunes. And since I didn't own any records when I was young, I listened to the albums my parents had, which was obviously Broadway show tunes. And that's why I love show tunes to this day. I was exposed at a young age, and so I truly love Broadway show tunes, and it's a good thing because my wife is a huge Broadway buff, so we have something to share in common. After my mom's passing, my sister gave me all of her albums, including her Broadway show tune collection, and here is one example. This is an original Broadway cast recording of How to Succeed in Business Without Even Trying, and this is on the RCA Living Stereo label. And anytime I hear a show tune, I instantly think of my mother. Anytime I was driving with my mother in her car, she always let me pick the radio station that I wanted to listen to, even though she hated most of the music I listened to. And I used to ask her, so who's playing on the radio now? And the only band she knew, she would always say, oh, the Beatles, or oh, the Rolling Stones. And obviously she was wrong 90% of the time. You know, it's funny, over the years she came to know which were Beatles songs and which were Rolling Stones songs. So anytime I'm in the car and hear a Rolling Stones or a Beatles song come on the radio, I think of my mother. Even though my mom didn't like much of the music I listened to, we both agreed on one singer. We both loved her voice, and that is none other than Barbra Streisand. And here is one of the CDs which I purchased for my mother. I used to love to buy her music, especially Barbra Streisand, who she loved, and she would play the CDs in her car all the time. Anytime I hear Barbra Streisand on the radio or I play her on my stereo system, I also think of my mother. And now for last video's unknown albums. The first unknown album. This is Oranges and Lemons. It's by the band XTC, came out in 1989, and it's on the Virgin record label. This is the 11th, yes, the 11th studio album for this band. XTC has been around for a while. They came out in the late 70s with the new wave, and they quickly changed from new wave into a more pop sound. The title of this album comes from an old English nursery rhyme, which talks about people unable to pay their bills. And this was a sort of an inside joke that XTC used, saying that they aren't getting paid enough money to cover their expenses. As you can tell by the album cover, this album has a somewhat modern interpretation of the psychedelic sounds of the 60s. The cover art is also a tribute to the artist who did the Yellow Submarine movie, and that is Heinz Edelman. This album is redrawn from a 1965 pop poster by the artist Milton Glaser. The album garnered a lot of critical acclaim. It reached number 28 on the UK charts and number 44 on the US charts. XTC is a much overlooked and underrated band. They probably were one of the better bands to play pop music in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The band wrote fantastic pop lyrics, and they are up there with any of the other great pop bands of their day. I highly recommend listening to XTC albums, especially this one, Oranges and Lemons, but there are other great albums by them, including Skylarking, which was produced by Todd Rundgren, as well as The Black Sea and English Settlement. The second unknown album is a toughie. If you got this one, congrats. This is from 1980, Scott Wilk and the Walls, and this album is on the Warner Brothers label. Scott Wilk and the Walls wanted to emulate Elvis Costello and the Attractions, and I think they succeeded 100%. Now, I used to read Trouser Press back in the day, and the magazine wanted to really hate this album, but they couldn't because the songs were fabulous. This really sounds like a lost Elvis Costello album from his early days. So if you're an Elvis Costello fan, especially his early albums, I think you're really going to like Scott Wilk and the Walls. And now for this video's unknown album, the first unknown album. Great, hope you got that one. The second unknown album. Great, hope you got that one too. As always, if you think you know the answer, please let me know in the comment sections below and I'll let you know how you did. As always, this is Alex with All About Albums. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. And remember, your mom.